everybody, I'm Beebs Kelley. Welcome back to another video. Harry and Meghan's Colombia trip is off to a controversial start. Naturally, when is anything they do not steeped in controversy? It's all about the way they go about things. You would think by now that they would have gotten themselves a handle on these sorts of issues and be approaching things differently. But that's the main issue and pattern that you tend to see in people who are really high in narcissism or who are relatively toxic. They will continue to make the same mistakes over and over, completely unwilling to change or improve or take in any sort of advice or critique. Constructive criticism, none of it. So within hours of this Colombia trip starting, Harry's chief of staff quit. This was bad press, no matter which way you look at it. Despite trying to spin it as an uneventful end to a trial period, it certainly looks more like further evidence of the ongoing trend of Harry and Meghan being very immature and difficult to work with, creating a challenging work environment, and also the Sussexes having such a poor image, unwilling to take on PR advice, resulting in an unappealing association for many professionals, just the reputation the Sussexes have being so negative and controversial. It's not necessarily a good thing to have the Sussexes as your work history. It's not necessarily going to boost you. It's not like, oh, cool, wow, you worked for some people who are really impressive and successful. No, it's, oh, you worked with people who are just tragically failing at everything. What role did you have in that train wreck? Not exactly great for the resume. People don't stay working for this couple. The majority of the staff has had a hugely high turnover rate. Think about a business you've worked at or frequented in the past. When there's a high turnover rate, there is a reason. Something is off. The pay is too low, they're too demanding, they're not organized, schedules are difficult, hours are crazy, boundaries aren't respected, stressful work environment, something is wrong if the turnover rate is as high as it is for the Sussexes. Changing jobs is not an easy thing. It's a big deal, and it's disruptive to your life, to your finances sometimes. People would rather not, in most cases, leave their jobs and have to go searching for a new one, especially this day and age with inflation and the job market being so competitive and harsh. People will stay in their job if they like you. They'll stay longer than they should in a job if they like the people they work for and they like the place that they work. It's fulfilling, if it's not stressful, if it's pleasant, if they're getting paid adequately. People don't quit like this. The constant high turnover of staff only highlights that things have not improved or stabilized for Archewell or the Sussexes over the years. For the first few years of Archewell's existence and the Sussexes sort of getting set up in America, it would make sense to have some degree of a higher turnover rate than usual for a period of time while you're trying to find people who are going to be the right fit in hiring phases and staffing up your foundation in this case. You have to figure out what sorts of staff you actually need, what positions are kind of redundant and more advantageous, and who is a good fit for these things. It does take time to do that. And so, despite seeing mass exodus of employees and staff from Archewell and Invictus several times over the first few years, I think people were more keen to excuse it at first. But now it's to the point where they're past that initial time frame, that sort of grace period of, oh, it's normal to have a little bit of high turnover at first, to where now it's impossible to make reasonable justifications for this high of a turnover rate. It's increasingly obvious that this comes down to the Sussexes. They're difficult to work for, they're childish, they're unaware. And Archewell in general is being run incredibly poorly. Who can forget the fact that they did fall into delinquency earlier this year because they didn't file their paperwork and send their fees adequately with enough time. And they still haven't sent in their 2023 paperwork and fees. There is a year-long grace period, apparently, and they have gone way beyond that for 2022. 2023 is still not up to date. If that is not a sign that a charity or a foundation is being run in a really disorganized, perhaps inadequate manner, I don't know what is. Regardless, this trip itself we can see is being justified as focusing on cyberbullying and the negative impacts of a digital world geared towards keeping children more safe online. But why that is tied to Colombia is not clear to literally anybody. The press, the media, the public, everyone is wondering, what the heck does this have to do with Colombia? What is the connection? With the exception of the loose association to the conference in the fall, which I have explained a couple of times now. I will link the videos up here or in the description box if you don't know about that. But even that is still a very, very loose connection. It's not really making sense of like, yeah, it makes sense to tie these two together. Still isn't quite working. The biggest challenge that they're facing with this trip is that the public simply doesn't understand why they're going to Colombia, why they're pretending to act like the royal family. What is this all about? It really looks quite desperate. And it feels out of place at the same time. It is weird to have private individuals attempting to emulate royal tours, which they apparently hated a lot. And the fact that they're trying to make it look royal when it's so far from it and so not that way. There's no real goals with this trip. There's no like desired outcome to bring awareness of anything specific, really. There's not a clear mission statement for this trip. It's all just sad and desperate and pathetic. Nobody's really buying this. They're trying to spin it that they are focusing on negative impacts of technology and that it required this vacation to highlight that. That's like how they're trying to spin this. That's what they're wanting people to just accept. This is especially weird when the people of Colombia feel that the government is spending a lot of money on this vanity project for the Sussexes, providing millions of dollars worth of security and accommodations when they're struggling. It's a controversial move for the government, to say the least, and there's been a lot of stories about corruption and whatnot within the government and the finances involved. So it's definitely not really a good look or advantageous for the Colombian government, for the people. The main question everybody's asking is, why do you need to travel to Colombia or anywhere really to highlight negative impacts from digital spaces? You don't. There is no good reason for them to have to be in a different country to be able to do this. It's absurd. Also, interestingly, they seem to have not partnered with People magazine this time around. When they were in Nigeria for that vacation, they had an exclusive deal with People magazine that there would be exclusively positive coverage of the Sussexes and people would get better access to their tour, their trip. Maybe People magazine didn't enjoy the backlash or didn't enjoy the very controlling nature that the Sussexes had with their media approach in Nigeria, where it was very, very filtered. It was not legitimate news and free press. It was controlled. Some might say that vibes the same as propaganda. They essentially blocked invited journalists from publishing anything critical or negative. The VP of Colombia says that she learned of Harry and Meghan through their Netflix show, which is kind of a tacky thing to say in the first place, but it's a terribly ominous sign. If this lady actually believes a fraction of what Harry and Meghan said in Netflix, if she couldn't see through the showbiz of that scripted, manipulative, narcissistic ego trip that the Netflix series was, then that's really, really bad in and of itself. But anyway, the press has described their arrival to Colombia and greeting from the VP as cheesy. So some people are getting the impression that this is just as much an ego trip for the VP as it is for the Meg. I don't personally have much of an opinion on that. All I know is that there's been a lot of criticism of the VP for her overspending, not being fiscally responsible for her citizens. But let me know what you think. I'd be interested to read from those of you who know more about the situation in the comments. But upon arrival, there was this moment here where Meg apparently demanded Harry hold her hand, just said, "hand," and he gave it to her. He said, "Here you go," and held her hand. And this is a perfect example of what many people have picked up on with the hand-holding thing. It is an optics move, period. End of story. And it is one that Meghan herself demands. She's fixated on it, and it's seen as a controlling sort of a move by many people. The most significant thing that they did on day one was this panel where Meg and Harry both offered up a lot of bland platitudes and a lot of the same drivel we've already heard many times. Her telling us that as a mother, protecting kids for their futures online is the biggest priority, and a lot of saying nothing with lots and lots of words. But I found this particular quote from Meghan Markle particularly interesting, quite rich and hypocritical. Meghan's quote says, "Maybe your grandmother used to say it to you. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all." Well, Meghan and Harry should have taken their own advice, don't you suppose? When they left the royal family, instead of trashing them and lying about them and exaggerating everything they could on Oprah, in Spare, on Netflix, in Archetypes, and in all the interviews that they've done, and even through Omid Scobie in his Endgame book, all the attacks on the royal family, Nothing nice to say, exclusively negative things to say. Really, really rich, Meghan. Perhaps they shouldn't have said anything, and then maybe they wouldn't be the most disliked public figures voted 2 years in a row. This is the key reason why the Sussexes got so much criticism. Harry and Meghan say one thing and do the other. Them coming out saying don't say anything that's not nice after all they've done is say things that are not nice about the royals and other people. It's so rich. In fact, Harry and Meghan have scarcely said anything nice about the royals at all. The people who gave them a wedding and home, all worth millions of pounds, extra privileges, and funded everything for them, gave them relevance, and haven't spoken out against them, not once. Harry and Meghan are the bullies. They are the ones who need to take that advice. They are the ones who have dug themselves into a hole that is so deep it offers them little options besides apologizing profusely and publicly if they ever wish to calm down the criticism of their actions and choices. And during their panel, it seems they once again just point to the problems rather than discuss how to solve anything. Beyond just saying, stop it, okay? Look at this problem. Let's point at it. It really wouldn't have taken much effort from either of them at all to shift this conversation towards simple, straightforward position that is buildable and solution-oriented, such as teaching young people how to recognize fake content, AI-generated content, how to cross-reference sources and information in order to be able to confidently discover the truth, the importance of being able to determine real versus false content. That wouldn't be as focused on Harry and Meghan, and it would be totally foreign for Harry, who is always fixated on the negative, paranoid view of a situation. It would remove the connection to Meghan Markle and her personal feelings of being criticized, where she can continually tell her victim stories. So it's unlikely they ever would do it, but they should. They should pivot this towards publicizing methods and techniques to being your own filter for news and online content, helping people build the skill of being able to evaluate the content that they see and the validity of the information that they read, being able to detect something that is true versus not, sourced versus not, conjecture and opinion versus fact, dry, raw facts, is a skill we should all develop and pass on to younger generations. But Harry and Meghan do not take solution-based approaches to problems and discussions. It's in huge contrast to Prince William, the royal family, all of them taking solution-focused approaches like Earthshot Prize. It's very motivating towards conversations around solutions rather than the depressing doom and gloom of certain statistics or problems that concern people. It is the right approach to the problem. The Early Years Project, solution-based conversations. What Harry and Meghan do with these little panels is all problem focused, talking about the problem, pointing it out, discussing the various ways that the problem has impacted them themselves and their personal anecdotes about the problems. The problem with doing it that way is not just that it removes you from solutions and being able to talk about the solutions, but it also keeps the conversation in that more negative target and space to where Harry and Meghan once again just seem like they're complaining again rather than talking about solutions and moving the problem forward and solving it, which would allegedly be the goal here, to solve the problems. But it also leaves it sort of in this negative space. It just like picks it up and drops it right back in the lap of everybody who heard what they said. There's not really any hope to solving it. And I think that that's a big problem with discussing issues in general when you don't turn it towards that solution-driven conversation where people can really get away from the downsides of an issue and focus more on what can be done and inspire creativity towards those solutions. So the approach is all wrong anyway, but it also perpetuates Harry and Meghan's negative public image that they just complain and they just point out problems. But let me know what you think about this in the comments. We're taking a closer look at the Colombia trip throughout the week and next weekend in more detail, so be sure you're subscribed so that you do not miss those upcoming videos. And it is time for question of the day. Do you think the Sussexes have kids? What do you make of the rumors? So for the purposes of this portion of today's video, it is all hypothetical and for entertainment purposes only. So the rumors around the Sussexes kids, I completely understand why there is so much speculation because there have been so many shenanigans from Harry and Meghan and they have not handled this well at all. I think from a parent's perspective, you should shut those sorts of rumors down, because for a kid or a young person as they grow up to find out that there's entire rumors or conspiracy that they don't exist at all could be particularly upsetting. So I think it's irresponsible for Harry and Meghan to not shut this down. They have the power to shut it down. And at this very conference, that Meghan talks about protecting her own children from these sorts of things. And Harry talks about misinformation being bad. But yet Harry and Meghan spread misinformation all of the time. But also they have the power to stop this particular rumor and just say that's absurd. Obviously. Knock it off. And then their children, one day, when they find out that this rumor is out there, will know that their parents stood up for them and tried to shut it down. Wouldn't you want that in the timeline of this saga, to have spoken out and said, that's ridiculous, knock that off? Obviously, these children are real. Wouldn't you do that as a parent? I don't know. And the fact that they haven't has just lended to that speculation continuing and growing. So it's weird, and it makes me wonder why they would choose to not shut it down, just like with the surrogacy and pregnancy sorts of debate online, just that people are wondering. And it's interesting, to say the least, that they haven't elected to just clear it up and put a stop to those rumors, conversations, when it's tied to their children. I can understand other rumors or conversations being like, that's not important enough to comment on. Obviously, not everything should be commented. But when it comes to their kids, and you combine that with the things that they've said just this week on this panel, it really maketh no sense why they have not. And I also think that commenters should respect the fact that that can be a sensitive thing for these kids who it's not their fault their parents aren't handling this properly, or the things that their parents have done. It's not the kid's fault. So I think that when it comes to that realm, it deserves just a little bit more discretion in that area. And that's why I tend to stay out of it when it comes to that speculation in particular, though I do understand why people speculate about it. But leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm sure it'll be an interesting discussion. It's interesting timing this question tied to this video where they talked about these things on this panel, and yet they're not practicing what they preach either in the end. So thank you so much again. I appreciate you being here with me today. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye.